when my mom called, and went out into the field to see my dad. He was laying there on his back. I could, looked like the dogs had licked the blood off his face that came out of his nose after he shot himself. I felt for a pulse. He didn't have any. And so I stood next to him and I went, "Yes! Good for you. Good for you." Now, let me tell you a little bit about my dad so you understand why I said that. He came from a stoic and realistic family. We were walking through the barn one day and we saw a pitchfork that was pointed up, laying on the barn floor. And he told me about a time when his dog, when he was a little boy, was running through the barn and chasing a cat and ran into the pitchfork. And it didn't kill it, but it damaged it severely. So we made a bed for it in the barn and visited several times during the night. And in the morning the dog was dead. And he went to his mother, and back then when you had a sick pet you didn't call the veterinarian in Ohio on the farm in the early 1900s. He went to his mom and he was crying, and he told his mom that his dog had died. And she said, "Clifford, you knew that dog was going to die, so why are you crying now?" Another time, we had a cow that was had difficulty having a calf, and my brother Steve and I were helping my dad with the birth. And if you had a cow that was having trouble, after a while you had to use a tackle block, which is like a rope and a pulley system, and you hook that to the calf's feet and you pulled on the calf. And it works better if the cow is laying down when you do this, but we didn't have that luxury. This cow was nervous and wouldn't lay down, so we had her in a head gate so she couldn't back up. And we were pulling on this calf, and my brother and I were pulling the rope, and my dad was working trying to get the head of the calf out of the cow. And we were pulling hard enough that the cow's rear legs started to give way. And it would have worked better if the cow went on her right side, away from my dad, because we would have had a better angle to pull the calf out. So he tried to push her that way, but she came towards him, and he tried to back up, but he had his back against the wooden fence, and he couldn't back up. And when the cow fell on his left leg, I heard the large bone in his lower left leg snap. And so there he was, trapped under the cow. My brother and I managed to get the cow off, pull him out, and while we were doing that, he didn't groan, or he didn't cry, or he didn't holler. He just said, "You know, it would have been better if she'd have fallen the other way." Now, even though he was stoic and practical, he was also compassionate. He raised registered Holstein cows, and similar to registered dogs or whatever, there's what they call a true type that the ideal cow would look like. And he had a cow that was very close to the true type. He showed her at the Wayne County Fair, and he showed her at the Ohio State Fair, and she won many blue ribbons. She was a good milk producer, And she was a friendly cow. She had a nice disposition. And she lived a long time, but she ended up getting frail. And normally, when you had to get rid of a dairy cow, you just called the guy with the trailer and you ran her on and he took her away, and that was the last time you ever saw her. But this cow was special. So when the trailer came, he got a blanket, put it on the cow, and rode in the trailer with the cow. Got off the trailer with the cow, went with her to the butcher shop or into the killing floor, kept the other cows away from her, kept the guys in the butcher shop from being mean to her, stayed with her until they killed her. My dad started having little strokes as he got older, TIAs they call. And they really weren't very bad, but they accumulated over time. And he couldn't remember quite as well as he remembered before. And then he had one that was quite a bit worse, and it affected his voice a little bit. And he asked me if it affected his voice, and I told him it did. And that was the only time I saw him cry my whole life. I don't know that he was crying because he was sad, or if he was crying because the stroke had diminished his ability for him to control his emotions. He had a couple of good buddies that ended up having strokes, ended up laying in bed for months, unable to talk, unable to take care of themselves. So, being practical, I think in his mind he chose the way out that he felt was the best. He had been a farmer all his life, and he was familiar with the cycle of life and death. So, I don't know. Not too long after he committed suicide, I had occasion to talk to a nurse. I've forgotten why, and also I brought up the fact that my father committed suicide, and she said, well, that's too bad. He was so depressed that he did something like that. And I reacted and said, I don't think he was depressed at all. I think he did what he thought was practical. I don't know if that's the case or not, but that's what I said. Now, about this same time, I had a friend who grew up in a different city, and he told the story of a milkman who had been back when they used to deliver milk around the houses. And he had had this same route for over 20 years. And he was going to retire. And he knew most of the people on the route, so he didn't want to just not show up one day and have them wonder what was going on. So on the Monday of the week he was going to quit, he put a note in with the deliveries that said, thank you for being good customers all these years. I have a lot of fond memories of talking to you and interacting with you, but Friday will be my last day. So Friday came around, and he was going from door to door delivering his milk. At one place they might be just a card with best wishes on it. Another place they might have some bread they baked. Another place they might have left a little bit of money. He got towards the end of the route, and it was a house that had recently changed hands, and a young couple had moved in. And he got there, and the lady met him at the door and said, I understand that this is your last day. You're retiring. He says, that's correct. She says, come on inside. She said, I made lunch for you. So he went inside, sat down. She had a nice lunch prepared. So he was sitting there eating lunch. She went away for a little bit. And wouldn't you know, she came back, and all she was wearing was a very scanty negligee. And she took him by the hand, took him back in the bedroom, and they had a romantic interlude. Well, she got dressed, or he got dressed, he was getting ready to leave, and he was just about to go out the door. She said, "Oh, by the way," she said, "there's $1 on the table for you." And he said, "You know, I really appreciated the food." And he said, "The lovemaking was just wonderful." He said, "But what's the $1 for?" "Well, you know, you left that note on Monday saying you were retiring, and I asked my husband what we should do for you, and my husband said, 'Fuck him, give him $1.' She said, 'Lunch was my idea.'"